Okay, welcome everybody. Here we are. There we go. All right, settings are all set.
Want a cold cup of water? It's not really cold, or hot tea or something.
Just regular water.
Okay. I want to say Lila Notzach, Baruch Hashem, a good Yom Tov, everybody. Today is Hei Teves, and we want to celebrate everyone who did their daily reading. So kol hakavod for everyone who did your daily reading, and you will receive this incredible book called from Rav Dov Pridson called Illuminated Sound, the Baal Shem Tov on Prayer. The shipment did not arrive today, so as soon as it comes, I will give it to everybody. It is really powerful. I've actually been reading it for a while now, and it has made a very big impact in my davening. So we decided to get it for everybody in honor of Hei Teves. And everybody that earned the sefer for doing their daily reading is Bracha Zirkin, Ruta Cohen, Ariela Zuckerman, Ricky Winner, Devorah Lieberman, Rachel Schmerling, Esther Citrin, Yosefa Wood Eisenberg, Sima Deshevsky, Nechamadina Herzl, Yehudis Hecht, Adina Lapine, Fegi Shway, Malka Stern, Debershi Liberov, Callie Aronson, Shelby Aronson, Esther Malka Cohen, Doreen, Khani Albuquerque. So a huge mazel tov for everyone who did their daily reading and their journaling. And I want to share that next week, Be'ezus Hashem, Wednesday night is our finale for Farbrengen. It also it was planned. It also is my birthday, and being that Living Chassidus was a birthday hachlata that I took on 9 years ago. So it is our 9-year anniversary for Living Chassidus. So everyone's invited to Living Chassidus Center to come and celebrate together. We're gonna have Farbrengen, and yeah, it's gonna be great. Now, for many years, I've had a dream to bring an incredible speaker who is the director of Kehot, and I've tried in many, I love the Friedman family, so I've tried in many different ways, and Baruch Hashem, this year, it actually worked out. So we have the great zchus of having Rabbi Yosef Friedman, who, for everyone or anyone who's ever picked up any Kehot sefer, if you look in there, there's always the name Rabbi Yosef Friedman and other names as well. But he is the director of Kehot, and we are so grateful for everything that he does. And thank you so much for speaking for us today. It's a great zchus. I'm gonna put this there. Do you want me to switch it so you don't see yourself?
So I don't see myself?
Was that better?
Probably not.
If you want, I can switch it.
Switch it. Is that
Yeah.
okay? Is that good?
Do you... Is that good?
I'm fine. So where are we reaching to? Who's out there?
So we have.
Where are they?
So we have the people are coming here, and we also have some people it's women in New Jersey, in Muncie, in Philadelphia. We have Baltimore. We're all around.
Okay.
Close enough to send them their booklets and prizes.
Yes.
Okay, it's not international, it's interstate.
Yes.
Okay, so good Yom Tov. And it's Hei Teves, so it's a big Yom Tov. L'chaim. Well, there's this famous Jewish joke, right? How do you encapsulize Jewish holidays or Jewish history? You say they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. So usually there's a villain, there's a bad guy, and try to do terrible things, and usually our lives were at stake. And the miracle is that the Jewish people were saved and survived history. What is Hei Teves that it's such a Yom Tov? How does that fit into the picture of the existential threat and scary times? It's about a library. The library was going to be pilfered, and was it about books? Was it about property rights? What was the story that gave us Hei Teves? So, in order to understand Hei Teves, it's a good time to talk about Hei Teves Kislev, because Hei Teves Kislev is known as the Chag HaChagim. The Rebbe is called Hei Teves Kislev the festival of festivals. And whenever a Rebbe would say Yom Tov, and not specify which Yom Tov he was talking about, he meant Hei Teves Kislev. So Hei Teves Kislev is Chag HaChagim. You find it the Friedman Rebbe's writing, you find it the Rebbe's writings. How do we understand Hei Teves Kislev, and how does that parallel with Hei Teves, which gives us a better understanding of what we're celebrating? Now, interestingly, in Likutei Deburim, which is the primary source for Chassidic, wow, this is slipping, for Chassidic wisdom or Chassidic, what we call lachluchis. You know, there's the teachings of Chassidus, and then there's the lachluchis. There's the glue that keeps the Chassidus together, the davening and the learning and the minhagei Chassidus. There's a glue that keeps that flowing, because otherwise you have davening, you have learning, you have things that you do as a chassid, but in order to keep all these in focus and keep them together and directed in the same direction, there's the lachluchis. There's the lachluchis means the moisture that kind of gives it the sticking and staying power. So Likutei Deburim is are you familiar with Likutei Deburim? Okay, Likutei Deburim is from the Friedman Rebbe. It's a collection of his talks. Like the Rebbe, we have Likutei Sichos, there's Likutei Deburim, and it was selected as they were printed. They came out in little Likutim, small pamphlets. Later they were put together in 4 volumes, and later into 2 books of 4 volumes. And it's the Friedman Rebbe, mostly, or at least a couple of volumes before he came to America. A lot of his writings are there. For instance, the famous description of his arrest is printed in Likutei Deburim. And you knew that when you were growing up as a chassid, you need to read Likutei Deburim. You need to get that flavor of what Lubavitch was about before the war, how it came to America, and what it became after the war. Its history, its legacy of Chassidim, of a lot of older and early Chassidim, and of course of the Rabbeim. And the Rebbe would often ask a bacher, familiar with the Likutei Deburim, and he was very, very happy when bacherim were proficient in Likutei Deburim, and it was like something that you knew you should be your reading, your required reading. So in the first volume of Likutei Deburim, there's the talk for the Friedman Rebbe, which is actually the second section. Each Likut had several sichos of the Friedman Rebbe. So the first one, I think, is Sukkos or Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah, and the next one is Hei Teves Kislev. And in that Hei Teves Kislev story, in that talk, the Friedman Rebbe talks about his uncle, his great uncle. His name was Reb Nochem. Reb Nochem was the Rebbe, and he describes that he would celebrate Hei Teves Kislev every single year. He describes the character of this Reb Nochem famous story that happened with the Alter Rebbe. But the point I want to bring out is that the Friedman Rebbe says that every single year Reb Nochem would sit down and Farbrengen Hei Teves Kislev, and he would tell the story of Hei Teves Kislev as if he was reading the Megillah, which means he started at a certain point in the story and took it till the end, and he did the same thing every single year. He would start how their arrest happened, what led up to it, and repeat it every single year. So in Hei Teves, I guess we should be doing the same thing. Also because it should be a tradition, and second because Hei Teves is our Yom Tov. It's our Hei Teves Kislev plus. So I was asked to talk about Hei Teves. So Hei Teves, I had the schus. I was fortunate to be kind of in the inside when the story went down, and it was a tremendous, tumultuous time for the Rebbe and for the Rebbitzin, and subsequently, and as a result of that, for all of Chassidim. It was 1985, Tavshin Mem Hey, when let's back up a little bit. It's all about the books and all about the Rebbe's library. And what is the Rebbe's library, and where did it come from? Right adjacent to 770, next building, 766 Eastern Parkway, is the Rebbe's library. It is now known as the Agudas Chabad Library. Basically, as a result of the book trial, kind of the name changed, although the facts were the same before and stayed the same after. But the Friedman Rebbe amassed this library while in Europe and managed to bring part of it with him to America and kept on growing it while he was here. And he grew the library based on what he inherited, starting from the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe began that library, and it went from Rebbe to Rebbe to Rebbe to the Friedman Rebbe, who expanded it greatly. So not only did he take books that were gifted to him, or purchase books, or purchase libraries, it also contained all the ksavim, all the writings and all the manuscripts of every single Rebbe. So if you have a manuscript of the Alter Rebbe, it went from generation to generation. Where is it now? Whatever was saved is in the library right here on Eastern Parkway. Now, some of it was confiscated by the Germans, some was confiscated by the Russians. There's a court case now in Washington, as you know, against the Russian government, who's holding a part of the Rebbe's library. And actually Friday, Hey Chanukah, just last week, we had a great victory against the Russians again, where the court rejected all their appeals, and we're perhaps a step closer to getting the library back, hopefully. But this is the library that's now part of negotiations between the two superpowers, between America and Russia. And what are they arguing about? They're arguing about the ksavim of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's and the books that belong to Chassidim. So the library was here in 770 in the basement, in the original 770 back in 1940 when the Friedman Rebbe moved there. I was there all the years, and the library kept on growing. When the Rebbe became Rebbe, he also started to grow the library and kind of kept it as a separate library. His separate from the Friedman Rebbe. And it came a time in 1985 when it was noticed that the Friedman Rebbe's library, some of the shelves were missing books. And it went on for a short while, a couple of weeks. And every day they saw that something was going on. So they installed a surveillance. There was no surveillance camera there. And they found who it was that was coming into the library and taking out the books. Now, these are very valuable books that on the international market sell for over, hundreds of thousands of dollars per book. And it turned out it was the Rebbe's nephew, it was the Friedman Rebbe's grandson, who was taking the books. So they quickly changed the locks and stopped that. But at the time, he was claiming that he had inherited these books, and the books were his. So you can imagine the anguish that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were going through at that time when a quarrel became factual and actual between them, that he's taking things that really belong to Chabad Lubavitch, and he had already sold a number of books, over 120 books on the international market, and the Rebbe was beside himself. And for a while, people tried talking to the people involved, and it didn't help. So then he called in a group of older Chassidim who were members of the board, what's called Agudas Chabad, which is a umbrella organization for the Rebbe's institutions, and confided with them what was going on, kind of saying, it's not just me, it belongs to the movement. And nobody really knew what to do, because this was like new. The Rebbe was very, very private and very, very personal, and never shared, a family issue or a family problem, or even things that troubled him. He did not air them to anybody, to the Rebbetzin, I guess. And it was a very difficult period. And the Rebbe spoke about it publicly. After speaking to these group of Chassidim and nothing was happening, he spoke about it publicly more than once, and not just on a Shabbos where there's no microphone and no recording, but even in the weekdays he had spoken about it at the beginning of summer in Tammuz. I remember I was up in camp and there was a surprise Farbrengen, and all of a sudden I was talking about such anguish and such distress about nobody knew what he, except for the few people in the inner circle, nobody knew what he was referring to. But he said people went into the Friedman Rebbe's holy chambers and took out books and stole books. So he spoke about it at Yud Beis Tammuz at the Farbrengen publicly, and then he spoke about it on a Shabbos, and everybody was just beside him. So they saw that it was a period of something was going on. Nobody could put their finger on it. So I remember I was sitting a Saturday night after one of these Farbrengens, middle of the summer, at my father-in-law's house, Rabbi Krinsky, who was the Rebbe's secretary and is also a member in the Agudas Chabad board, and kind of commiserating, what could we do? What should we do? I remember saying, he said to me, he said, I'm thinking maybe I'll just break the story to the New York Times. They love to write about literary stuff and libraries and stuff like that. It's a great story. And it'll bring an awareness to the world, and people will do something about it. And then on the other hand, he says, it may not be effective. Maybe we simply have to stop the person from selling these books, because he had a lot of books that he was putting out on international markets. Meanwhile, we were sending out people to find out who the purchasers were, because in the end, all the details of the story are recorded, but in the end, all those books were purchased back. Every single one was tracked down, and they were purchased back and brought back to all, I didn't forget the number, were brought back to the library.
With legal help, or just
Besides the legal battle that ensued, this was just to get those books back, just purchase them back. We found who it was, and
they were willing.
Yes, everybody realized once the people realized where the books had come from and how the Rebbe was upset, everybody
So it was
sold
only
them back.
Chassidim who bought them?
No, collectors. You're talking about people who are not
They were happy to give
Chassidim.
it up.
Yeah, but they didn't return for free. We paid for them. In other words, we had to purchase them back. And
Who paid for them?
the organization. So then my father-in-law says to me, he says, perhaps we should get legal help so before we get legal help, we have to speak to a Rav if that's fine to do. So he did that. But at that time, how do you prove that it's not an inheritance? The Friedrich Rebbe had 2 daughters, and there was only one grandchild, and that was this grandchild. And it was assumed that the Frierdiker Rebbe was collecting the library, that it was his. But the Rebbe was saying that it was not like that. Anyhow, so at that time, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Igros Kodesh were being printed. That's when the whole series of the letters of the Rabbeim started. It started with the Frierdiker Rebbe's letters. There was like 9 volumes out by that time. Now there's 23 or so. And I remembered reading some letters there about the library. Because, yeah. But I remember reading letters there about the library because Jacob had to get that library to America. And those early letters are the letters of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. And that's when that library had to be brought. And so I went over to the shelf and I pulled out one of the volumes, and lo and behold, right there's a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe to a gentleman by the name of Alexander Marx. And the Rebbe writes to him that he has a library that he needs to bring to America. It belongs to the movement, and it's a treasure for the nation. And could he help in the government channels to make sure that the library is transferred? So we looked at the letter and we said, this looks like it kind of is, at least for a beginning, to start. We say here's a document by the Frierdiker Rebbe saying that it's not personal. It belongs to the organization. It belongs to the organization. The grandchild has no claim to it. So after quickly next day, getting in touch with the Rabbanim and with Nat Lewin, who's a big lawyer, religious lawyer in Washington. They went and they took out what they call a TRO, which is a temporary restraining order. In other words, before you have a trial, if you could show a judge that you are being wronged, what they do is they make an injunction temporary, everything has to stop, and he's ordered to stop. The books, even more than that, the books or whatever stuff is questionable that is being stolen are impounded. That's exactly, they're taken away from the person who stole them. So although he's not yet convicted of a crime, he can't hold on to the books. It's put into a bonded storehouse, which the court is in charge of. So it doesn't go back to the owner, but also doesn't go to the ganef. So that's what happened. A judge quickly gave us a TRO, temporary restraining order, and the books were impounded and put into a warehouse. And that stopped the bleeding, as they say. He couldn't steal any books anymore because the locks in the library were changed, and he couldn't sell the books that he had because there was a restraining order.
When were all the books bought back by?
It took a good few months.
Like after Hei Teves?
No,
Before.
before.
That?
But after Hei Teves, we got back the books that were held in the storage. Those came back after Hei Teves.
Like he was living here and his mother, like the Rebbe.
No, his mother lived in 770 upstairs, and he lived in New Jersey.
And she didn't say anything, like
So it could be she gave him the nod and the wink, and it turned out later in the case that she kind of did, and that was part of the tragedy of the story because the Rebbetzin and her sister were very, very close, and that kind of changed after that. But the crime was greater for what he did and why it became quickly a federal case, because if you steal an item and you take it across state lines, it becomes a federal case. If you just steal it and you keep it in Brooklyn, you're just a thief and New York State has to go after you. But if you take it across state lines, it becomes a federal case and the federal courts are after you. So what ensued after this was a court case that the verdict came in 1987. So it was 2 long, hard years.
They're still talking about it?
No, not publicly after that.
Okay.
After
Once
that.
things start happening,
Right. I'll stop talking about it. And we'll see some interesting parallels, why I mentioned Yutas Kislev, between how the Rebbe treated this and how we know the story of Yutas Kislev, where certain things are kind of similar to how it was in Yutas Kislev. Now, this is all a story that's like a drama. and it's material, and it's witnesses, it's a courtroom, and it's a judge, and it's lawyers and attorneys and depositions. That Ebbetson had the famous deposition. Deposition is before you go to court. The lawyers interview the people of interest in the case, and they ask them their opinion. That gets recorded and gets transcribed and goes into the court record. So they wanted to interview the Ebbetson, which means they would come into her home, because they agreed to that, rather than she should go to the lawyer's office. And they would set up a camera and with a sonographer, and the lawyers would ask questions, and she answered a full line of questioning, which took quite a while. And
She answered in English.
she spoke in Yiddish, and there was a translator, a court-appointed translator. So what happened was that Rabbi Krinsky, who started this whole thing, was in touch with the Rebbe, of course, every single day after that. And at one point, my father asked him for a bracha, and he said to him, "You probably received the bracha from my father-in-law, from the Frierdiker Rebbe." The Rebbe says to my father-in-law, he said, "You probably received the blessing from my father-in-law." And he's like, and the Rebbe kind of picked up on his curiosity. He said, "Maybe at your bar mitzvah, it'll be okay." So then he realized that he was at Chassidus. His father had brought him from Boston on his bar mitzvah to see the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he got a blessing from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe was aware of it. And by the Rebbe, everything was going through the Frierdiker Rebbe's, the channels, the spiritual channels of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe's, the way the Rebbe went through the whole battle. So kind of finding a correlation between the Frierdiker Rebbe and him, he said, it'll be okay. At another time, because it was the group, it wasn't the Rebbe who went to court per se. It wasn't personally, the Rebbe was not the plaintiff. It was Agudas Chassidei Chabad, which is an organization that did that. And so the Rebbe was relieved that this court case was being filed. Of course, he agreed to it. And he spoke to the lawyers privately. He actually told them that he wants them to think as lawyers, not as Chassidim.
Well, they weren't Chassidus?
No. One was close to Chabad, but there was a big Philadelphia lawyer. But the main lawyer was Nat Lewin, is a Friedman Yid, not a Chassid, but is a big askin, a very big activist. So he said, "I want you to be lawyers, and do your job diligently, and not as Chassidim." He said, but the Rebbe says, "I would like you to understand what I'm saying, and then you take that in your own mind and use it as you see fit." So when he was once talking to the Rebbe about this and was asking certain questions, the Rebbe said to him, he said, Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of the Jewish people. And when it came to the story of Pinchas, right, with Pinchas and Zimri, he went to ask Moshe. Moshe said, "There's certain things you don't ask." And Zimri did what he had to do, and the Jewish people were saved from the plague. And he said at the time, so he said to Rabbi Krinsky, he said, even Moshe Rabbeinu needed a Pinchas. Kind of like you do what you have to do. One of the big involvements in the case was when they insisted that the Rebbe be deposed.
What does that mean?
Deposed means they have a deposition, which means that lawyers will come and ask you questions. We start to talk about the Frierdiker, about the Rebbetzon's deposition. So Rabbi Krinsky said to the Rebbe, maybe we should try to get out of her deposition. And the Rebbe said, I think she would do well. She would come through with flying colors.
Wow.
And he was very sure in how she would perform. And the day came when that happened, and she asked my father-in-law to sit next to her. And the lawyers were tough. And when lawyers ask you questions, they ask you the same question throughout the whole 2.5 hours in different ways, and they try to trip you up. And you said something because you weren't thinking it through, and then later you said something else, and even little.
Your own lawyers?
No,
No.
your own lawyers are there to
Oh,
protect you.
it's
They
the
don't
other
ask
side.
terrible questions, but the other side, they ask you the questions. So it was very tedious because she understood English, but she wanted it in Yiddish. And every time they asked a question, the lawyer translated it, and then she answered in Yiddish, and he would translate it, and then they would start to argue. Did he say this? Did he say that? Did she say this way? Did she say that way? But the famous line that she said at that deposition is what the Rebbe later said carried the case, because all the way at the end, the lawyer said, "So, in your opinion, to whom do these books belong? To your father or to the Chassidim?" And she looked him in the eye and she said, "My father and the books belong to the Chassidim."
Did you say that line in English?
No, Yiddish.
Mhm.
Yiddish.
There's a voice note.
And then
going on.
quietly she said to my father, she says, "Maybe his tefillin." Like maybe his tefillin were his, but everything else belonged to Chassidim. And that was such a powerful line. Now what happens is certain depositions, all the depositions are brought to the court if the lawyers submit them. So when they submitted the Rebbitzins and the judge read it, he says he would like to see the videotape, and he watched it. And when he finished, he said one word. He said, "Remarkable." He was very, very moved. So anyhow, after the deposition, my father-in-law came to the Rebbe and kind of reported on her deposition and how it went. And the Rebbe said, "I told you she'd come through in flying colors."
Wow.
That's when he said that she'd do a good job. So the judgment that came in the favor of the Rebbe was vast. There were a lot of witnesses who testified. There's something called expert witnesses. An expert witness is when you call an expert on a certain subject. So let's say you're dealing the court case about automobiles, and so you have the people who are dealing with the case. Then you bring in an expert who explains, or whatever it may be. So they called in experts on Chassidim, experts on books, different experts who came in to testify, because what happened was Rabbi Levine and Rabbi Wilhelm and others who helped them, those are the librarians who have all the documents in the library, started to do research. It was just incredible how they crammed in so much research in such a short time. And they came up with reams and reams of documents that kind of showed how the books were bought, with which money the books were bought, and how it all pointed in the direction that it was the Rebbe on behalf of Chassidim, not the Rebbe. In other words, it was buying it through the organization, for the organization, not privately. So they called in expert witnesses who testified what does the Rebbe mean, and what does Maimed, money that Chassidim give to the Rebbe for his own personal livelihood, is called Maimed. You give donations to the Rebbe's institutions, to his charities, but you also give personal money to a Rebbe. So what is Maimed? So it was there were a lot of deep concepts that came out during this whole court case. And the Rebbe also wrote a lot of notes to Rabbi Krinsky about the case, and certain things that should be pointed out and should be said. And there was a lot of depth what a Rebbe is, and how the Rebbe is dedicated to has no personal self. Everything is for the Jewish people. So while there was this whole material fight going on about material objects, you could sense that there was something behind this whole thing, and that was something that was spiritual. So in Hei Teves Kislev, the same thing happened. Alter Rebbe was arrested, and he was brought to jail. So he sat in a physical jail, brought by physical guards with guns, bayonets and rifles, whatever they had then. And yet we know that it was all a result of a kitrug. It was all part of something in heaven that told the prosecution down here that what the Alter Rebbe was doing, which was revealing secrets of the Torah, was not accepted in heaven. He was revealing too much Chassidus. And as a result of that, it transferred itself to a physical and material assault on the Alter Rebbe. So that's why Yutas Kislev is Chag HaChagim. Why is it the greatest Yom Tov? Because at that time, the physical world agreed that Chassidus should be taught. So the threat to the Alter Rebbe's expansion and Teres Chassidus that he was teaching was justified. Not just justified in heaven, it was justified here too, and vice versa. So just interesting to point out a bit of a list of things that are so strangely, spiritually connected between Hei Teves and Yutas Kislev. What happened over here, and as similar to Yutas Kislev, is just like at Yutas Kislev, there was an opposition in heaven to what the Alter Rebbe was doing. There was opposition here to the Rebbe, because what the gentleman who took the books, I use that word advisedly, who took the books and said that he was the grandson who inherits the books, he was saying that Chabad doesn't exist anymore. That was with the passing of his grandfather, Chabad is over. There's nothing going on now. There's not really a continuation of the movement. As a matter of fact, he said 770 is his house. If you can inherit the books, why can't you inherit the house? Right? Because the house is where the Friedman Rebbe lived. So it was, what?
Every family has its own, even the
Well,
Rebbe has, like,
yeah, well, that's because we look, because we see things with fleshy eyes and fleshy understanding. But as you will see, it happened to be, the Alter Rebbe's, who brought the case against the Alter Rebbe? Was it Ivan? It was Jews. And that's part of the story of Yutas Kislev, that the opposition to the Torah of the Alter Rebbe didn't come from the Goyim. It came from the Jewish people, which is deeper. And it's a deeper opposition. And over here, the opposition came not from a Goy, and not from a Yid, not just from a Chassid, but from a family. So it was a very, very deep opposition. And it expressed itself by the fact that he took out books. But the motive behind that was that there's no Lubavitch now. So it's over, and I could take my stuff.
Was he a chassid at the time?
No. So obviously not.
Well, I mean, did he present himself?
No, he had moved away. He had moved to New Jersey. He wasn't that religious. And his father was the director of all the yeshivas. His father was sat by all the Farbrengens. Sure, he was very close with the Rebbe. He was older than the Rebbe. He was the older son-in-law, but he submitted himself to the Rebbe's leadership.
That's why he said that he's the one who took this farm. He's the one that gets this farm.
Right, because he's the only
Father,
grandchild.
right.
He was the only grandchild. He was the only.
The children of the Friedman Rebbe weren't dead, so why should he inherit
Who?
things? Why should he be?
His mother told him he could take it. His mother was an elderly woman, and she said, "Take books." The point was, and after she passes away, so in other words, it was inevitable that it would happen after she passed, and after the Rebbetzin passed. So it was just that he jumped the gun on it, and it was able to be quashed.
But does she know, when she said take books, does she know that what he was going to do with the books?
Yeah, he said he needed money.
Oh, wow.
So that was like a double whammy. Frierdiker Rebbe's library was there's so much history and blood, sweat, and tears that the Frierdiker Rebbe put into it. You know, when he had to leave Russia, he insisted, "I have to take my books with me." They said, "You can." He said, "I'm not going." It was his life, and the Rebbe we know was a man of books. What did the Rebbe do all his life? He published, he edited before he became Rebbe. And those from 1940 to 1950, he was the director of Kehot. He annotated the Mamorim. He wrote introductions. He wrote his own Svarim. Everything was about books, and the Ksavim, the heritage of Chabad were the Ksavim and the books, and that's what he was going after. Interestingly, let's take some parallels between Hei Teves Kislev and Hei Teves, so we could appreciate, because everybody appreciates Hei Teves Kislev, but Hei Teves is like, okay, what happened? The Mezritcher Magid, who was the Alter Rebbe's teacher, and the Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov, had said that he regarded Alter Rebbe as his son. Actually, he learned with his son. Magid had a son, Rabbi Avram. He was called Avram the Malach. He was called an angel because he was like out of this world. And he paired them together. But he said that I also consider the Alter Rebbe my son. And before his passing, he asked Rabbi Zusha Anapoli, who gives Haskama on the Tanya. He said he referred to the Alter Rebbe as his Rav. That's why the Alter Rebbe is called the Rav. He's the Rav, the author of the Tanya, the Shulchan Aruch. He's called the Rav because he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. And he said also before his passing that to the Alter Rebbe that Hei Teves Kislev is our day. Because the Magid of Mezritch, before he passed away, told the Alter Rebbe that Hei Teves Kislev is our day. And sure enough, Mezritch Magid passed away in Hei Teves Kislev. And then years later, the Alter Rebbe was freed on Hei Teves Kislev. So the Alter Rebbe was considered a Rav by his master and a son by his master. We see also with the Rebbe, his father was Rabbi Lev Yitzchak. But in the time that the Rebbe spent with the Frierdiker Rebbe back in Europe and even in America, and we saw this in the Rishimus, in the journal of the Rebbe that was found after Gimel Tammuz, after the Rebbe passed. We have the journal that the Rebbe wrote during the years that he was in Europe. And there's so much there that the Frierdiker Rebbe imparted to the Rebbe, who was just the son-in-law at the time, of those type of things that the Rebbe's passed to their children. Like when you read the Frierdiker Rebbe Sichos, like I mentioned before, the Likutei Devarim or any other Sichos of Frierdiker Rebbe, he's always saying things he heard from his father, who heard from his father, who heard from his father, who heard from his father, going back to the Alter Rebbe, or going back to Tzemach Tzedek. These are Rebbe kind of materials that you impart to a future Rebbe. And the Rebbe was getting this kind of attention and such kind of information from the Frierdiker Rebbe when he was a young son-in-law. And in his letters to the Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, when he wrote to the Rebbe, or when he wrote to other people about the Rebbe, he called him Harav Hagon. So there's a little parallel between how the Mezritcher Magid referred to the Alter Rebbe as a son and as a Goin, and how the Frierdiker Rebbe called the Rebbe a Goin, and also told him things as if he was a son becoming a Rebbe. Now, when the Alter Rebbe was arrested, the famous story that the guards came to arrest him, and he went to hide. He was evading the arrest. And then Shmuel Munkes, the famous Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, had a discussion with the Alter Rebbe, and he told the Alter Rebbe, "Why are you hiding? If you're worth it to be arrested, be arrested. If you're not worth being arrested because you're a Rebbe, so no, on the other way, if you're a Rebbe, be arrested. What are you afraid of? You're a Rebbe. But if you're not and you're afraid, then why are you giving us such a hard time? As a Rebbe, Chassidim are asking us to do all this Avodas Hashem if you're not really a Rebbe. It was a very, very deep, it sounds like it was chutzpah, but Shmuel Munk was a very, very deep chassid, but he was also a jester in a certain way. And he always made freilach around him. But he told this to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe says, you're right, and the Alter Rebbe came and got himself arrested. The point is that the Alter Rebbe spoke to a chassid before he submitted to be arrested. Because again, like we said before, the Alter Rebbe was not a private individual. Like the Rebbitzin said, he belonged to Chassidim. So you're really going to go get yourself arrested and end up in a Russian jail? I got a responsibility to my Chassidim. So he had that conference kind of with his chassid, and then they went forward with it, which is the same thing which happened in the book trial, because before we started the book trial, he spoke to Chassidim. He spoke to the members of Agudas Chabad about it. He spoke to Rabbi Krinsky about it, and he spoke about it publicly to Chassidim, and kind of said to the Chassidim, help. You know, you never saw the Rebbe so troubled as you saw during those few Farbrengens when the Rebbe spoke about the case before it started, or what happens. You know, the Rebbe, being the servant, the Eved of the Eibishter, and the Eved of the people, Bnei Yisrael, that he led, he never sat back in his chair at a Farbrengen. Imagine, the Rebbe always sat at the edge of his chair like this, his hands on the armrests for hours. Never leaned back. Never had, and when he was in public, he never leaned back in his chair. He was completely devoted to the Chassidim. The only time he sat back in his chair was twice a year, when the Gabbai would get up and make an appeal, whatever, 2 times a year. So that he would stand there, the Rebbe, and tell a story. Yeah, he was supposed to tell a story and announce about an appeal that was taking place for Malava Malka, for Gemilas Chesed, the Gemilas Chesedim fund, and also they used to sell the mitzvahs. You know, Simchas Torah and Shul, they would sell who has the right to open up the pareches, who has the right to pay for the lights, who could pay for the wine. Those were auctioned off. So on Shabbos Bereshis, the Gabbai of the Shul would do that. That was the only time the Rebbe kind of relaxed in his chair listening. But whenever he was doing what he had to do, as a Rebbe, he was always forward in his chair. The only other time was when he spoke about this case, because he sat back in his chair and he turned, like his entire body was facing left. It was like looking off in the distance, and it was a conversation that was so hard to watch, because you saw that Rebbe was talking from such anguish and like from a different perspective. So again, that was how the Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe had the same thing, that he consulted with Chassidim before he let this thing happen. You know that we sing Pada V'Shalom Nafshi, and that's kind of the song of liberation. The Alter Rebbe was released on a Tuesday. Yutas Kislev that year was on a Tuesday. And the Rebbe often speak about the fact that Pada B'Shalom, you know, there are 3 ways that Tillim is broken up. We say Tillim by the month. There's also 5 books, and there's also by the month. So, by the week. So Tuesday has in it the kapitel that has Pada V'Shalom Nafshi. So although it was Yutes Kislev, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was released, it was on Tuesday. On Tuesday, you say kapitel Yud, and the end of the kapitel Yud is Pada V'Shalom Nafshi. When did the trial start? The book trial? It started 1986, Tafshin Memvav, on Yutes Kislev. And when did the Dan Natzach happen? Hei Teves. On Tuesday. Yeah, 1987. It was Tuesday. And the Rebbe always used to say to do things on Tuesday because Tuesday is Yom Shehuchpal Bo Kitov. In creation, Hashem every day said, V'yara Hashem Kitov, Hashem saw that it was good. But on Tuesday, it says twice, he saw it was good. So Tuesday was a special day. The Rebbe often noted that Hei Teves Kislev has a shaychus and a connection with Hanukkah, because it leads into Hanukkah. And the Rebbe also had said that Hei Teves comes as a result of Hanukkah. So the Rebbe tied the two together. Interestingly, another connection was that the Alter Rebbe was in Peterburg, and that's where he was sitting in jail. Now, there weren't too many Chassidim who lived there, because you weren't allowed to live in the capital city. Jews weren't allowed to live there. But when word got out that the Alter Rebbe was freed, somehow, in all the shtetlach and all the cities and all the places all around Russia and beyond, they found out immediately, and pandemonium broke out all over. And even the Chassidim who had come to Petersburg to be there, and those few who were allowed to live there because they were business people, so they had special permits to do that. The Rebbe describes that on Hei Teves Kislev, when the Alter Rebbe was released from jail, Chassidim were doing somersaults in Petersburg. That's like somersaults in Petersburg. You're not allowed to step into Petersburg if you're Jewish. You're not allowed to live there. But Chassidim were so happy and so elated. With the Gemacht Kulis, they were doing somersaults in Petersburg. And Hei Teves, for those who were here, I remember I was sitting in the office and we had just gone to the court because we got a phone call that there's a verdict. Don't forget that the trial took place in 1986. The books were stolen in 1985 summer. And then the temporary restraining order was taken out that summer, but the trial didn't begin till Hei Teves Kislev of 1986.
Oh, wow.
And the trial was 2 weeks long, and it started on Hei Teves Kislev. The verdict came in 1987 on Hei Teves. What happened was the judge, after the trial wrapped up, the 2 weeks, there was a huge federal mafia case, and he was called to be the judge on that, and he was completely out of commission. So whenever it came, that's why it came so much later. So I remember I'm sitting in the office, and we got a call from the court that we should come pick up. There's a judgment. So quickly ran down to the courtroom, and it was a federal court in Manhattan.
Wow.
Manhattan or in Brooklyn? No, Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. And came back with the psak and quickly went into the Rebbe and brought it to the Rebbe. We'll talk about that soon too. But immediately, everybody came flocking to 770. Word got out quicker, a lot quicker than it got out in by the Alter Rebbe in Petersburg, I can tell you that much. And 770 was going crazy. Outside of 770, the dancing and the somersaulting that was going out was kind of a parallel to what happened to Hei Teves Kislev. I was sitting in the office, and a good friend of mine came in, and he's like carrying a tray of chicken, and he's carrying a tray of coleslaw, and he says, "What's going on? We got it for paying," you know. He was like we were busy with the nitty gritty. It was the middle of the day, afternoon, man, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. It was afternoon, and the place was just rolling. And what happened was Chassidim Farbrengen for 7 days, 7 consecutive days.
Wow.
It was actually called 7 days of Sheva Brachos. That's what a nonstop.
And the event is going to be next week,
Oh.
part of it. There's an event next week, and the calls for paying the rest.
The end of Sheva
Yeah. So when the Alter Rebbe was freed, Chassidim were ecstatic, and the Alter Rebbe was subdued. And he wrote a letter to Chassidim, they should be calm and not do anything brash. He felt that there was another round to come. And indeed there was. And why is the 5th Lichtel of Hanukkah a special night? Because the 5th Lichtel of Hanukkah, the Alter Rebbe had been arrested again. And he was released again on the 5th Lichtel of Hanukkah. Yet the main Simcha is Yud Tes Kislev, not the fifth lichtel. It's kind of a minor, third or fifth. Yeah, third or fifth. Yeah, right. Said third or fifth. The third. So when Rabbi Krinsky brought the sack into the Rebbe and gave it to him to read, and the Rebbe quickly looked at it, the Rebbe didn't express any outward excitement, and which by the Rebbe would be like that. But Rabbi Krinsky asked him if the Rebbe would speak, and the Rebbe says, we have to think about it. He asked me if he would be a Farbrengen, and they said, we have to think about it. In the end, the Rebbe spoke every single day for 7 days after Mincha, but it wasn't a Farbrengen. So the Rebbe also felt that it wasn't over. And indeed, it wasn't over, because there was an appeal. And after the appeal, which we resoundingly were victorious, even stronger than the original verdict. And then there was a third case, which was kind of a case personally against the Rebbe. And that ended many, many years later.
Connected to the Svarim?
Yeah, connected to the Svarim. And it was after that final case that the Rebbe on his own said to him, now we could say Chassidus. So during this entire time, there was this huge kitrug that was going on that we didn't see. I mean, we knew, we sensed it, but the Rebbe was living through a very, very harsh kitrug, like we say, was parallel to Yud Tes Kislev, and perhaps even greater.
When was the third verdict?
1990, maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So funny. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. Who knows the story of Devar Leah, the Alter Rebbe's daughter? Right, we all know that story. So when did the story of Yud Tes Kislev begin? Did it start when Avigdor told his lies to the Russian government that the Rebbe is sending money to the Turkish army against Russia's will? Or it started years earlier when she gave her life for the Alter Rebbe? So that happened years before, where she said that she heard from her father that difficult times are coming. And she called in the Chassidim and said, I want to give my life for my father. And indeed, she passed away shortly after that. And her son, the Tzemach Tzedek, became the Alter Rebbe's son. And he raised him. So there was a physical tragedy. The kitrug had manifested itself and personal loss to the Alter Rebbe of his daughter. And what we know and what we saw in Hei Teves was that the same thing is what the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, because it sapped their health, sapped their energy. The Rebbetzin passed away. Luckily, she passed away after the victory of Hei Teves, which was 1987, but she passed away in 1988, and surely had an effect on her health. And the same thing with the Rebbe. It was a terrible, physically difficult period, which is another parallel between Yud Tes Kislev and Hei Teves. And at the same time, we know that Devorah Leah giving her life for her father kind of gave him the victory that he needed, that he went on, which is what the Rebbetzin did with the Rebbe with her deposition. Because the Rebbe mentioned that how good she would do, and the judge in his testimony even wrote what she said, banking on what she said. So it was like Chanukah and Purim, it was the great Jewish women who did what they did and brought about the Geula. By number 11, the Alter Rebbe writes about Yutas Kislev, that it will become a moed timidi, a constant Yom Tov, an everlasting or a perpetual Yom Tov. And in order to honor that day, the Alter Rebbe said he wants to make a chulkas hashas. Everybody should take a masechta and learn one tractate of Talmud every year. That became what Yutas Kislev was all about. And the Rebbe, the same thing also, a year later, in 1988, said on Hei Teves that this is now becoming a Yom Tov, similar to what the Alter Rebbe said on Yutas Kislev. And of course, he gave us the mitzvah of the day, which is either buying a book, or repairing a book. Does anybody even know what that means anymore? How do you repair a book, right? Or donating and helping the library, the Rebbe's library. So there was like a mitzvah of the day that learning the book was the overarching. That Rebbe actually said that. And the Rebbe said that probably the reason why we had this whole kitrug, why we had this whole danger to the movement was because we weren't studying enough. We weren't using the books enough. So the Rebbe did actually say that.
It's interesting because in Israel, every year in Yutas Kislev, there's a big book sale that people buy.
Yeah, Yutas Kislev.
For 100, or it's amazing.
Yeah. You were there?
I was here, but people really buy.
I know. One of the things that Rebbe would write when he referred to the victory of Hei Teves, he would write that the victory took place in the federal courthouse of the United States. He wrote that in Hebrew. Meaning, you could win an argument with a friend, you could win an argument with a teacher, you could win an argument with someone above you. But when the argument is in your favor by the government where you live, there was a tremendous meaning to the Rebbe, that the government, which is reflective of the Sodom Lamaila, of the angels who protect each country, has its own Sar. When that's translated into a victory presented by them, it's a much stronger thing. And the Alter Rebbe actually also writes in his letters that his victory was le'enei kol ha'amim, that the nations, all the nations could see that Torah and Chassidus is holy and should be taught. So it's another very similar thing of how Hei Teves meant, what Hei Teves meant to the Rebbe, which is what Yutas Kislev and Alter Rebbe. We spoke earlier that the kittug on the Alter Rebbe was from a Jewish person, but it was on Torah, and within Torah it was on Chassidus. Chassidus is the light of Torah and the light, the Oir of Yiddishkeit. The kittug of Hei Teves was on the luminary who gives that light. So here the kittug was on the Oir, on the light, and the kittug of Yutas Kislev, and the kittug of Hei Teves was on the Mo'ir. It was on the originator of the light. In a certain way, a deeper thing. What does it all mean to us? So they wanted to get us, they didn't, and now we ate. And we have the mitzvah, and we have the mitzvahs of the day. But interestingly, when the Rebbe spoke right after Gimel Tam, right after Hei Teves, he started off by saying that we have to live with the parsha of the week. Daf leben mit der Zeit. We have to live with the times, right? Famous line that Rebbe repeated countless times. So the story goes that Alter Rebbe said, "Daf leben mit der Zeit." Chassidim didn't know what it meant. So the Mittler Rebbe told them that it means you have to live with the Parsha of the week. You have to study the Parsha. You have to live with the inspiration every week of the Parsha. That means leben mit der Zeit, living with the Parsha of the week. You think leben mit der Zeit means you got to live with the modern, whatever happening in life and era day. No, it means you have to live with the Parsha of the week. So the story goes that the Mittler Rebbe said that. What was the Mittler Rebbe at that time? At that time, the Alter Rebbe appointed the Mittler Rebbe to be involved and to educate younger Chassidim. The Alter Rebbe was swamped with work and with Chassidim. So for the younger Chassidim, the Alter Rebbe appointed his son, the Mittler Rebbe. He should be their educator. He should be their mashpia. He should be their leader. They're going to mashpia. That's part of the original story of Leben mit der Zeit. But the Rebbe didn't mention Leben mit der Zeit thousands of times, hundreds and thousands of times. He didn't tell that story, who he said it to, and more than that, what was the job of the person he told it to. But when he spoke Hei Teves, he said, Daf Leben mit der Zeit, and then it's kind of like a sidebar. He says, which is what was told to the Mittler Rebbe, and the Mittler Rebbe, who was in charge, the younger Chassidim, and he explained it. It was like a little out of context to talk that detail when he was talking about Hei Teves. And it's very possible that what the Rebbe was saying was, this is a yomtiv for the younger people. This is a yomtiv for the people who are going to be young people, or for generations to come, who are not by the Rebbe. So you're talking about the younger people who weren't by the Alter Rebbe, they were being educated by the Mittler Rebbe. So Hei Teves is a time where it's an event that speaks to younger people who are not present. Matter of fact, the Rebbe had said at the time that after the victory of Hei Teves, the Rebbe said, "V'techi ruach yankev aviham." It's also part of the Parsha of those weeks of Hei Teves, where after Yaakov finds out that Yosef is alive, what does the pasuk say? Leben mit der Zeit. V'techi ruach yankev aviham. Yaakov's spirit was alive again. And the Rebbe referenced that pasuk, v'techi ruach yankev aviham, as a result of Hei Teves. That after the victory of Hei Teves, where it was established on high and in the federal court that Chassidus, Chabad, exists, and it didn't finish in 1950, as someone had proclaimed, but it continues and stronger than ever. The Rebbe was one of the Farbrengens that I was talking about. He says, could you imagine the person said that Chabad is not active and the Friedman Rebbe is not doing anything anymore because he passed away. He says, how could a person say that? The Rebbe is more active than ever. The Friedman Rebbe is more active. The Rebbe said, like in a Russian English accent, more active than ever before. So this was the judgment ruled by a non-Jewish judge who said, no, the books belong to Chassidim and belongs to Chabad because Chabad exists. That didn't end. So that's the Vatchi Ruach Yankev Avim that the Rebbe referenced, that Yaakov's spirit is now alive once again because the Friedman Rebbe is alive. The Rebbe always didn't speak about himself. It was always through the Friedman Rebbe. But to us, it meant the Rebbe was alive. The Rebbe is alive. So the Vatchi Ruach Yankev Avim is a result of the Hei Teves victory. So it speaks to us because, you speak to people who never saw the Rebbe. I speak to our children who never saw the Rebbe and future children who have never seen the Rebbe. In fact, the Rebbe spoke so much at that time that since his children are alive, he is still alive. And so the Rebbe is still alive. And Chassidus is alive. And the Rebbe is giving us the brachas through the Svarim, because we don't know what it is until we look into the books, until we study the books. So we understand what is Chassidus and what is the Rebbe and what it means to us. And the Rebbe empowered us through his words. He gave us all the kechas. You read any sikh of the Rebbe, you read any letter of the Rebbe. It was never like, oh, it's difficult and you have to come on to some Mesiras Nefesh. It's you have the power and you have the strength and you have the talent, and always uncovered within us that we could do it, and we could be who we're supposed to be, and could get things done with the Kehot of Chassidus, the Kehot of the Rebbe, the Kehot of the Eibishter. So on Hei Teves, I forgot one of the main stories of Hei Teves. The Rebbe said after Hei Teves that he's going to the Oihel. And he wants everybody to join him by sending along a request for a blessing, right? And it's a very auspicious time. And the brachas are flowing now in an incredible way. And he told everybody to give in. Usually you write a pigeon to the Rebbe, you also put in money. It's called a pigeon nefesh, a pan. Why is a pan called a pan? Because it's a pigeon. Pigeon means like by kaporos. You pay out, you pay for the kaporos. You pay for the zettel that you give to the Rebbe, to charity. So the Rebbe said the Rebbe realizing how this was going to evolve, he said that people should put two separate envelopes. One they should put in the pigeon nefesh for the tzedakah, and the other one they should put in their note that they're writing to the Rebbe. Send it to me. I'm going to take it to the oil. And the Rebbe says, write whatever your heart desires. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid, because it's going straight to the Eibishter. It's going straight to the Eibishter through the Nasi Hader. What's there to worry? And promised everybody that be abundant brachas. So this was Zion. Teves.
Shabbos.
Well, it's Hei Teves and the days around it. Rebbe always said that all the days around it are part of that day, but the day that actually went to the oil. So the fax machines, if you still remember fax machines, were nonstop overnight, because Rebbe spoke about it the day before, and thousands of letters came in. And people came running to 770, and letters, and people wrote other people's names and their own names. And I recall standing in my office, which is the big building right next to the top of the Weibershul, where our offices were in the front room. The Rebbe was getting ready to go to the oil, so the car was pulled up in the driveway. Hundreds and hundreds of people around waiting for the Rebbe to go. And we're watching from the window, and we see that the maskirim, the Rebbe's secretaries, are bringing huge shopping bags into the car. One bag, another bag. The Rebbe always went to the oil with a bag. And I don't remember the count. The car was full of huge shopping bags, full of notes of brachas to the Rebbe. And then suddenly, somebody comes running up from the Rebbe's office and says, quickly, the Rebbe is calling you guys. The Rebbe asked for Rabbi Krinsky's helpers. So I was there, and Rabbi Futafas was there, and my brother-in-law, who's now a shliach in New Hampshire, was there. And he was still bacher. No idea what was happening. We ran downstairs, and we were ushered into the Rebbe's room. It was like a shock, surprise that we never saw. Never happened before. And there were 3 bags on the floor in the Rebbe's room, full of the other envelopes, the money envelopes. And the Rebbe bent down. I remember walking over, and I didn't want the Rebbe to bend down and pick something up, but the Rebbe was quicker than you, and he just picked it up and handed each one of us a bag, and we pushed through the crowd, and we ran upstairs because the Rebbe told us that he wants at least some of it to be deposited in the bank that day. So as the Rebbe was leaving, we were upstairs in the office on the conference table, counting the cash, setting aside the checks, making the cheshbon, and it was late. It was the afternoon. The bank closes at 3. The Rebbe said he wanted some, at least some of it to go into the bank.
The Bank of America across the
The
street.
Bank of America across the street. That's where we banked. Anyhow, so I called the bank, and she let us in after, and we put all the money in, not just some of it. But the point is that by the Rebbe, the Gashmis and the Ruchnis, the mundane, the physical, and the Ruchnis were so entwined. I'm going to the oil and I'm bringing the requests, the deepest requests of thousands of Yidden to the Frierdiker Rebbe to go straight to the Ebershter, as he said. And he wanted the money that's attached to that to go into the bank. It should be sealed and delivered as in a tangible way.
Did you like tell Rev when you did it? Like I'm
He
saying,
was at the oil. So later we reported that, how much it was, how much it was, and that it's all in the bank.
This is money that people sent.
Is the money that people sent with the pajamas.
Was it like people would send $1 or people sent donations?
It's $1 was a donation too.
Right, meaning
So
like,
truth is, I don't even remember the figure.
Do they get their money, like from people sending money, do they actually get all their money back from rebuying the books back?
I think so. I think that I've paid them all.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a huge expense because a trial that took such a long time was amazing expense.
so you're saying you did
No,
this
I'm saying
donations
that
paid
all
off?
these donations, they pay off for like the books that they have to pay for it back.
Yeah, the people who laid out money to buy back the books, they never paid them back. They didn't want any.
Right, so you're
They didn't
saying
want any
from
favors.
this money.
They didn't want any favors from anybody.
So from this money that he got.
Not
he
from
paid
the
back
Oh,
pajamas.
well, they never had people who always gave money to them, bigger amounts, and smaller amounts, and big donors who gave a lot of money. This was like they say, Amcha. This was the regular people's money. It was everybody's money. So it was children gave them coins. So there was coins and there was dollars and $100 and checks, all kinds of. But the reports were that after that there was huge amount of brachas that took place. Children and babies and marriages and chasanim and kalas and health and business. It was incredible, an incredible eis ratzon. And that was also an indication of how there was a kitru going on at the time. An interesting parallel, which I skipped before, is when the Alter Rebbe sat in jail, Friedman tells the story that he had visitors. Who visited the Alter Rebbe in jail? The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. Where was the Rebbe every single day of the trial? He was at the oil. It was totally unusual. The Rebbe should go consecutive days to the oil. He was there every day. Rabbi Krinsky was in the courtroom, and Rabbi Klein had to take the Rebbe to the oil every single day. What? He fasted every day. Absolutely.
Why the libraries, like you can't go inside? Like
You could.
the real library? Like
You
every
could.
person can go to the real library?
how
No.
can you?
No, there are libraries like the Brooklyn Public Library, where you walk inside and there are shelves and you pull a book off the shelf and you take it home with you, and then you have to bring it back. Now, there's different types of libraries. They're called research libraries. A research library means that there are books there that are usually not available elsewhere. So you come into the library, and you use the catalog, and you ask your researcher. You ask the librarian, I need to look at these 2-3 books. The books are brought to you in a reading room, and you do your research, and you don't take them out. So that's a research library. So this library is a research library.
What about just going to like, we don't get
So-
researcher.
But to see all the
You could be a researcher if you want.
I'm
If you
saying just
Anyone
going
can
to
be
see
a
all the shelves,
researcher.
everything.
No,
just to see it, you
no, but he has exhibits there. And I think
Yeah,
you
yeah.
ever saw the exhibits.
know.
We had a tremendous problem here in the library during Hurricane Ida. Which not too many people know. You were here during
Doing what?
during the last hurricane?
I'm not following the hurricane.
Yeah,
no.
Shear's
Huh?
been here for a long time.
No,
No?
not the hurricane. No.
The hurricane was what? A couple of months ago.
Right.
Oh, really?
The one that like.
Yeah,
the
was
last
here.
one. The one that's here. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was
Yeah.
thinking about
You're thinking about Sandy.
Sandy.
Not Sandy.
Sandy.
Well, maybe you don't know it was a hurricane, but the rain, that everybody's basement in Crown Heights was flooded.
I guess so.
You got flooded here?
I'm fine.
Okay, so imagine this. in the basement of 770 where the shul is, right? You look down from the Weiber shul,
Right.
right?
The women's section.
The place was pouring.
Yeah.
That water was pouring through 770 like a river. Where was it going?
Oh,
The library.
Went to the library because on Eastern Parkway there's a bit of a slope. The basement of 770 is just a bit higher than the basement of the library, and they're connected.
Oh, wow.
So water was pouring into the library basement, and they had no idea. And when they came there in the morning, now the library has on the bottom shelf has an empty shelf of 6 inches. There's no books in the bottom on the bottom shelf. They don't keep books there because of that reason. But the flood came in 12 inches.
So it ruined the second shelf.
So the second shelf of books was completely drenched,
What can you do?
and there will come some valuable books there. So there's a company, that's interesting. This is just an interesting piece of information. It's a company that salvages books from floods. Maybe more than one company, but there's an industry that does that. They come and they pack up the books. They take them to a facility where they have huge freezers. They put the books into a freezer, and it freezes the moisture in the pages, so they can't spread, and that they can't grow mold.
Wow.
They're frozen for, I don't know, a week or something, and they take it out and they put it into a different chamber. I don't know what the other chamber does. It dries it or sucks the moisture out, whatever's left, and they return the books. So
But the pages don't stick together. You
No.
don't big book at twice.
no, it's amazing.
Ah.
It's amazing. So it's an expensive prospect, but all the books were saved, and they were just brought back Friday.
Wow. What?
A story under the radar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now the story was told yesterday. The story was told.
Okay, so I'm like, I did see a posting where like they said like the books were returned to the library.
Wow. That just gave me chills. That's insane. And then I think they just opened a new wing. Or
Yep.
I think they just started.
Right. Also on Hei Teves yesterday. Anyhow, so
Wow.
I don't know what you did for Hei Teves, but Hei Teves is still going on, and will go on until after Shabbos. The spiritual Hei Teves keeps on going. So it's an ace rotzen. It's a time for tefillas. It's a time for brachas, and you could ask for everything, like the Rebbe said. Ask for everything, and the Rebbe says he'll deliver. So it's looking up. It's looking up. If you haven't bought a book, buy a book. If you haven't fixed a book, fix a book. She was selling books before, so I guess that counts.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was the thought of like Basin ever considered, or because
Yes, he didn't want to come. He said, as a matter of fact, the judge's father was a prominent theologian, very famous theologian. His father-in-law was a famous theologian. That's someone who deals in theology, religious, God, that's the kind of stuff. It's like a philosophy. I'm sorry, it's a philosophy. So, so he was very sensitive to the fact that this was a religious case. So he called over the lawyers right at the beginning of the trial, and he said to them, "You know who my father-in-law is, and maybe you think I should not be the judge on this case for whatever reason." So he asked both sides if they agree that he should be the judge,
Wow.
and we had no problem with it, and the other guy didn't have a problem either.
Wow.
Yeah. He said during the trial, he says, I drive by Eastern Parkway quite often, and I pass that building, and to me, it seems to be a glass house. Like, in other words, a glass house is an expression that means there's no hidden agendas there. Everything is open. And he had that sense, and he kind of said that in the middle of the trial. But the trial hinged on whether it was the Friedrich Rebbe's or not. Now, we had all the evidence in the Friedrich Rebbe's own words that it belonged to Agudas Chabad, that it belonged to the Chassidim, as we say. But they were saying that the Friedrich Rebbe wrote that letter like the letter I told you that was found right away at the beginning, because Rebbe also pointed to that letter. This you have to take this as the main testimony. He said that Rebbe had to write that. He wanted to save his books from Europe. So when you're dealing with Europe, Europe was not a free country. You were coming to a free country. He had to get it out. So he had to write the letter saying that it wasn't the truth. It was really his own. He just wrote that in order to get the government to bring it across to America. And the Rebbe was like,
Wrong guy.
a Rebbe cannot say a lie.
Yeah.
It's just not possible. So the judge referenced that, judging by the character of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. He said it's impossible to think that he kind of almost said what the Rebbe said, not knowing what the Rebbe said. And in the appeals court, which is a bank of lawyers, a bunch of judges, not just one judge, they kind of reiterated that and said, you can't say that such a virtuous person as the Frierdiker Rebbe could say something other than what he really meant.
Wow.
So this was also like the truth of Torah came through in a way where the courts said that Torah is true and its leaders are true. So Torah's emes and Moshe emes.
But how the Rebbe was, not behave, like what do you find about this lawyer?
About who?
Like this person that's suing, like they were talking, they were like,
Personally?
okay.
When he was a child, they in Europe, they were close. He was a doting uncle and a doting aunt, and just one child in the whole family. It was a big yichus. But when he became Rebbe, he was embittered. He wanted his father to be the Rebbe. But that's not what Chassidim wanted. So since then it became strange. But when an action was done that made a statement in that way, and something that was irretrievable, that would just keep on going, and then you couldn't chase down the buyers, the Rebbe did what he had to do. Had great personal sacrifice. So it's a Yom Tov where the Rebbe sacrificed himself for us. I was just talking the other day to someone. He says to me, "No, the Rebbe suffered so much. I would have said we would have the Rebbe perhaps a few more years. You know, it took a toll on his health. But the Rebbe sacrificed himself for us, that it should continue as the movement he wanted, not that it stopped after the Frierdiker Rebbe. It was a Mesiras Nefesh that the Rebbe had for Chassidim, for Chassidus, and the Rebbe who he was for the entire Jewish people.
Can I ask a question?
That's why Hei Teves is a big Yom Tov.
Sorry, someone asked a question. Did Rebbe and Shana ever regret giving the go ahead? And how did the other relatives feel? Like, do they feel bad that their family did
Rebbe
this?
and Shana?
I guess.
No,
Was it was the Chamadina, right?
Chana. Oh, Rebbe and Chamadina and the daughter. Was Chana.
Who gave the go ahead? The daughter?
The daughter. Well, she was
Who the
already
mother? Okay.
gone then. The mother,
Oh.
not the mother, the grandmother. That was the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbetzin, who was in the Chamadina.
Who gave the go ahead?
She passed away in 1971, 70,
Oh, so he
71.
didn't take the book, but
71?
she said take the books.
That was
So
that was his mother, which is the Rebbetzin Chaim Lushka's sister,
Right, so who was that?
Rebbetzin Chana.
Oh,
Her name was Rebbetzin Chana Gurari.
okay.
Her
So
name
the
was
person wants to know
Gurari.
if his mother ever
Yes.
regretted.
Oh, if she regretted? She didn't tell me.
Do we know what happened to the man after? Like,
Nothing.
just
He just
Lived
made
his
it
life
even
until he
money
passed
again.
away.
Passed away before Gimel Tammuz, this person?
Huh?
Passed away before Gimel Tammuz, this person?
no.
Was it
I don't remember.
younger?
I don't remember.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. the nephew.
Yeah. The nephew.
Did he ever
Wow.
feel bad that he did it?
We don't know.
I mean, he felt bad probably that he lost. probably.
someone who mounted that battle. I mean, after he was exposed, he had the option of bowing out.
Right.
But he wanted that fight, so I doubt it. It was a world war. So, and at that time, Chabad didn't have good relations with Satmar. I should say Satmar didn't have good relations with Chabad. And he kind of teamed up with members of that community.
Wow.
So it was like,
Wow.
that was
Oh, bless you.
That's one way to do it. You need the money.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Chaim again.
So much. For a person who deals with Svarim, I think it'd be superfluous to give you a sefer.
Give me for what?
But
He's supposed to buy a sefer today, not give a sefer. Actually bought a sefer and gave it. I said, does that count?
So I actually wanted to, on behalf of all of us.
Oh
I
my
wanted to
God.
Thank you so much. And your wife, because your wife was a part of this.
I'll give it to her.
So for your wife, we have a tray. When she lights Shabbos candles, she has a match.
Oh.
And she can put down the match. And
A little light dispels light of darkness. Beautiful. That's so nice.
this is a
Thank
thank you to her. And again, I would usually give a safer, but I think that's just, so we have
Give me something practical.
our very favorite Living Chassidus umbrella.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh, this
This
one of
is-
those upside down ones?
Yes, it goes
Wow.
upside down and it says, no, brachas. Oh, the breath of let the brachas rain down. That's what it
Oh,
says.
nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Completely
Thank you so
unnecessary, but it's for my wife, so I'll take it.
much. Thank you so much. And
I wish you all well, and